Hello there, I am the Puppy Turtle, and this is my first video. It is a response to an atheist who calls himself Hatred42. It's like H8TRED 42, and he made a video, and I'm going to not really talk much about the contents of the video, but I commented on it, and he responded to the comment. I commented saying I would answer any questions he had regarding absurdities in the Bible, which he had mentioned in the video, and he said to do so in video form, so I'm now doing so in video form. Okay. The first thing that is supposedly, according to him, absurd is the Wall of Jericho. I assume he's referring to its collapse because there's nothing absurd about a wall existing in ancient times. And there is a potential scientific explanation for its collapse. Well, first off, it could have simply been a miracle. That is possible, but there is a scientific explanation, and that explanation is that, first off, let me explain exactly what they did that triggered Jericho's collapse. God didn't just make it collapse, he gave them instructions on how to make it collapse. He said, walk around with all of your men of war, and keep in mind, this was at least maybe several thousand people. We imagine 30, 40, 50 tops people going around a wall that would have been, and in our mind's eye, it's like small. No, this was 3,000 people. The wall was actually as if it was around a big city like St. Louis or something, probably. I don't know, I may be wrong on that. But what probably knocked the wall down was the sound waves, because at the end, right before it collapsed, to trigger the collapse after having walked around it for a while, which could have been a test of faith, or maybe the footsteps of 3,000 people weakened a wall that may have already been on its last legs, for all we know. Maybe it was going to fall in a month without their help, and God just had them speed the process along so that it happened at a more convenient timing for them. What probably knocked it down was the sound waves from the trumpet blasts. Right before they knocked it down, God told them to shout at the top of their lungs. A bunch of priests were holding trumpets, and they actually blew the trumpets as hard as they could. Everybody shouted at the top of their lungs, a lot of noise, and that is probably what knocked the Wall of Jericho down. Okay, the second thing is, well, actually, that was the second thing. I'm not going in order that you listed them. But another thing you mentioned was Noah's Ark. And Noah's Ark, there's two things you could be talking about here, and I will address them both. You could be referring to how did Noah fit all those animals in the ark, and you could be referring to how could water successfully cover Mount Everest. Well, let's start with fitting all the animals in the ark. First off, the size of the ark. The Amazing Atheist actually lied about the size of the ark, said it was 40 feet. Well, let me put it this way, he either lied or he is ignorant. It's relatively inexcusable that he would make a video about that and not know what the size of the ark was. The ark was, according to the Bible, 150 cubits long. But there's a problem. We don't know exactly how long a cubit was. The standard Hebrew cubit after the flood, which may not be the same as before the flood, was 18 inches. Egyptian cubit was 20.6. And since Moses was raised in Egypt, but they're referring to Hebrew, they don't know if it was 18 or 20.6. Or it could have simply been that Noah's personal cubit, because the cubit is the distance from elbow to fingertip. And according to the Turkish government, they actually found Noah's grave. And the skeleton inside was actually 12 feet tall. So his cubit could have been 3 feet long. So the ark was huge. And also the number of animals. Well, first off, there's no fish on the ark. There's plenty of water outside. And saltwater and freshwater fish could have both survived the flood because, according to most young Earth creationists, the reason that it's even saltwater today, the oceans are gradually getting saltier. The same thing that's making them gradually get saltier is the same reason they're saltwater at all. And over 4,000 years, it's proven by science that over 4,000 years, at the rate that salt is being added, a fish could adapt to that. Also, no bugs. They can survive a flood just fine. They can burrow under the ground. They can get on something that's floating. They don't need a large ark to hold them. Also, there's the fact that it would have been babies. It would have almost defeated the purpose to bring adult animals. There's so many reasons to bring babies. They are stronger, I will fall down and get straight back up from a fall that would send my great-grandmother to the hospital. And also, they eat less and sleep more, which was a big thing. Not to mention the fact that they would live longer after the flood and produce more offspring, which is the reason you brought them. There is no reason not to bring babies. I find it hard to believe that somebody smart enough to be considered to have a developed consciousness would not realize that you bring babies. Then there's Everest. Well, here's the thing. It is true that if Everest being covered, there's nothing special about the peak of Everest that makes it being covered the line. But if water got high enough to cover Mount Everest, that's what the problem would actually be. Well, there's two possibilities. One, and I think this is the best possibility, is that Mount Everest wasn't there. The Bible says that during the last part of the flood, the mountains arose and the valleys fell down. Mount Everest is a mountain. It was one of these mountains that arose. And that is possibly why mountains tend to exist in ranges. Or also, Mount Everest could be bigger today for some reason. I know it's growing. If you trace it back in time, get rid of all the snow, maybe you'll have less of a problem. Maybe you'll still have the problem. Mount Everest probably wasn't there. Your last objection is, how did they live so much longer before the flood? And you specifically cite without medical care. Well, you look old enough to have passed elementary school, is the point. I'm sure you know, or at least I really hope you know, because it'd be sad if you did not know, that medical care, the quality of medical care, is far from the only thing affecting age. There are two major factors that made them live a lot longer. The first one is diet. We eat, on a regular basis in the United States, people eat from a stock of maybe 30 fruits. Why? Because those are the most delicious fruits. But there are, in reality, 1,000 different types of fruit. Or at least many hundreds. Some fruits contain distinct vitamins that are only found in that one particular fruit. So, we are deficient in a lot of things that they wouldn't have been. They probably had a much wider variety of fruits to choose from. Today, we are deficient in a lot of things. Lecithin, particularly, comes only from bread made from unprocessed wheat, which I don't believe I've ever eaten in my entire life. And lecithin is responsible for the circulatory system, so by going with such low levels of lecithin, people now get more heart attacks and strokes. If you ever heard of the Hunza people, according to actual documents, not just anecdotes, the Hunzas actually lived to be 160 just because they had such a great diet. The second factor is oxygen. If you've ever seen Jurassic Park, when they drill into the amber bubbles, they can pull out oxygen, and what they see is there's 50% more oxygen than we have today. There's 35% oxygen in those, we have 21 now. And more oxygen combined with more air pressure. Most creationists theorize that there was a water vapor canopy. It's described as a water vapor canopy. It was probably actually ice suspended by the Meissner effect, because the theory is that this increased air pressure and that combined with more oxygen made people live longer and get bigger, which explains that 12-foot tall skeleton I mentioned earlier. Not to mention, of course, insects. They would get bigger, which is why we find gigantic insects today. We find like 15-foot long centipedes, 2-foot long grasshoppers, and also bigger fish. There would have been bigger fish because air pressure puts more oxygen into the water, and that makes the fish live longer and get bigger. Really, everything would live longer and get bigger. That's why we find bigger animals as fossils. In closing, I'd just like to say one thing. In the video, you tell a very tragic story. You talk about some Christians doing some things to you that, let me just make it clear, God does not call us to do. You are not, what you describe is not the Christian church I am familiar with. They were wrong to punish you for questioning. Okay? When you presented the questions, what they should have done is what the Bible says they should do. Be ready to give an answer always to any man that asketh us a reason for the hope that's in us. We're supposed to be ready to answer people who ask these types of questions. The Bible says to answer these questions. And your teachers, your parents, they should not have punished you for asking these questions. They should have answered them. And I think the subject of atheists growing up in Christian homes, being mistreated, and getting this preconceived notion that Christianity is this radical thing, when in fact what they saw was what we real Christians basically call the bad examples. And it is a tragedy. And I hope you understand. I just, all I did was discuss your factual arguments. I strongly sympathize with your plight. And with that, I'm just going to spend the few remaining minutes I have here talking a little bit about myself, because this is my first video. I want to properly introduce myself. I am the Puppy Turtle. I am never going to reveal my first name. I may reveal my first name. I'm never going to reveal my full name. Why? Because I don't want people to look it up and know where I live. I'm just going to warn you, my policy on blocking and deleting will be this. Comments like grunting insult comments will be deleted and the person blocked just automatically. If you just comment with something like, you're a fag, or F you, or you're an idiot, if you just insult me blatantly and make no attempt to even disguise it as a logical argument, I'm blocking and deleting that. And I think that's understandable that I would. And if you get more complex, if you do just a long list of insults, if you never address any of the points in the video, if you're extremely vulgar and profane, I'm going to block delete you. I may, if I get a lot of people blocked, I may, like at the end of the month, unblock certain people. You know, try to execute some forgiveness. But in general, I won't block any comment that makes or attempts to make a logical point or a point about the video. I will block delete an insult. And, well, that's about it. See ya.